Hello, I'd like to talk to you about language MOOCs made mobile. This is research that's been undertaken by myself, Elena Bartena, and Juan Jose Magaña from the Atlas Research Group. So, I'd like to firstly talk about what we feel to be the suitability of massive open online courses for second language learning, and then move on to consider these LMOOCs in relation to mobile assisted language learning, and then move on to talk about the affordances of actual mobile devices, smartphones and tablets for language MOOCs. And then finally draw some general conclusions and show where we are at the moment and our intentions for future work in this area. So, language MOOCs. When we started to experiment with MOOCs on the UNED platform back in 2012, it became pretty clear that they appeared to be quite appropriate for second language learning. And I mean, this, to a certain extent, is a question of common sense, because the majority of language classes, if you like, are typically small. So actually, when you're actually trying to promote interaction in the target language and getting people to communicate and speak, is actually the options for doing that are quite restricted. So if you've got a potentially heterogeneous group of students in an online community, then if the course is correctly structured, then this can facilitate communication between them in the targeted language. Obviously, there are difficulties associated with that, because since by their very essence these kinds of courses are open, then you can't necessarily control the level of the people who are coming into the courses. And some people, even though they think they have a certain level of a given second language, in fact they quite often don't, and therefore the communication between them can be sometimes problematic. The other things is that MOOCs actually enable us to integrate elements to potentiate effective second language development. So, for example, correctly structuring the educational content, providing relative activities which actually fit in with that, associated resources, and obviously the social media tools and technologies which, if you like, shorten the distance between the students and enable them to actually communicate. And as I said, this can actually be very beneficial to produce the interaction in the target language, but obviously you have to be careful. They need to have the right kinds of support mechanisms and to help them actually produce correct language, because if nobody actually corrects their production, then they're gonna learn bad habits, and which could be potentially very damaging, obviously. So when we actually talk about language MOOCs or LMOOCs, then right from the start, this generated quite a bit of literature, and there have actually been a few problems actually highlighted in the literature, in some of our publications and other publications outside. And I was just talking about the importance of the communication and the facilitation of this target language uses in the context of the course, and it does actually appear to be the case that quite a few people who take part in these courses aren't, shall we say, as proactive as they could be, leading to, if you like, the sitting back and watching the course take place. So obviously you need mechanisms in place to actually target these people and get them to interact and take place in the course. Also, one of the criticisms that these courses has received is that really, at the end of the day, the students are typically talking amongst themselves, which is a community of people who want to learn the target language, and we don't really have any native speakers in there, which is the ideal public to take part in this interaction for obvious reasons. And this is a fair criticism, but what we've seen from our own experience and what we feel is that even in other second language learning environments, in face-to-face classes or whatever, the native speakers still aren't there. So it's only for a small few who are able to actually move into a context where the target language is used naturally, then they can actually take part in this interaction. So the important thing here is really to facilitate the interaction, the use of the target language, and to correct the errors as and when they come along. Also, if you like, there's problems for the teacher, because language teachers have a well-established roles in language classrooms, and this role is obviously different for them in an online course. I mean, if you like, they're moving away from the kind of a top-down dissemination of information with little interaction to more of a facilitator role. If you're like a shepherd, somebody who's taking the students, guiding them gently along the path, but it has to be them that walks the path, if you like. So this is something which needs to be taken into consideration. If you like, we think that second language learning is in the middle of what one might call intrinsic MOOC suitability, in the sense that there's a network of competences, of skills and data that actually require, if you like, a cognitive involvement and social interaction on part of the students. And we can, if you like, compare this to learning a differential calculus at one end as a highly theoretical individual activity, through to the development of more practical skills. So language learning fits quite nicely into this area. When we actually talk about the kind of MOOC we're thinking about here, whether it's if you like a CMOOC or an XMOOC, once again, a lot of literature has been generated on this subject in general, not necessarily about language learning. And we really believe that there's not necessarily a magic bullet here that will actually solve the problems automatically. I mean, CMOOCs have the advantages. I'm sure you're aware of them as well as we are. And but on the other hand, they can lead to a lack of structure, a feeling of being overwhelmed on the part of the students. So they really do need to have the guidance. So, I mean, this is actually important that support is actually provided that's appropriate for this process. And that's why I've got it as a final point on this slide. This special support mechanisms are required, because obviously the problem in these courses is not just the head count, the number of students, it's the ratio of the teaching staff to the students, and quite often the teaching staff isn't actually there while the students are doing the course. So therefore you need, if you like, in inverted commas, smart mechanisms which will actually take into account these limitations. And I can mention a couple of these. This is definitely ongoing research, and we're experimenting with the sorts of mechanisms which can work. But for example, one of the things we found to be effective is what we call VIP feedback. So for example, if you anybody who's actually looked after forums and for any period of time will know that you begin to see the people, if you like, the leaders in the community, the people that are necessarily playing an active role. And they, if you like, take some of this role of supporting the community on their shoulders, with obviously limitations. And the question here is actually propagating the feedback and the support across the community. So therefore, if we're actually capable, if you like, of answering a few key questions generated by these people, then they will take it on their shoulders to actually then dilute and give the appropriate feedback to people in the community. And this appears to work reasonably well. Another possibility as well is actually looking at the automatic or semi-automatic generation of subgroups related to topics or problems. So the people who really have something to say or difficulties related to specific language issues can be brought together and, if you like, feel that they're in a smaller, closer environment to work on these sorts of problems. Okay, so let's look at LMOOCs and more now. Well, I don't think there's anybody who's listening to this who would disagree that smartphones and tablets really have made the word mobile, if you like. And we've only got to look at the data, and there's just so much of it so for me to choose from. But for example, the latest data I saw was that I think last year, up to the last 6 months ago, somewhere in the region of 1.25 million smartphones and tablets were sold, as opposed to just over 250,000 desktop computers. I mean, the downloader apps on the two main operating systems, iOS from Apple and Android from Google, were over somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 billion. I mean, I can just go on giving this data forever, but I mean, for example, the social messaging apps, which is also, as you can probably imagine, very, very interesting for language learning. I mean, there's over 50 of them are now available. 50. I mean, we typically think of WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, for example, but there's an awful lot of competition, which is very good at this when we actually think about the possibilities for developing new kinds of interactions. And just on WhatsApp alone, there's over 14 billion messages generated a day, which is really quite incredible. And I think, if you like, this is a reflection of the kind of life we have. We're living a mobile life, essentially. Even if we're living in the city, we're constantly traveling from one side to the other. And this is related to MSM, if you like, the idea of mobile social media, that quite a lot of interactions on the big social networks like Facebook, I think is up to about 70%, come from mobile devices. So this is really, if you like, opening up great possibilities for all of us to actually access the information and services that we really want. I think when you look at MAL, I mean mobile assisted language learning, I mean there's really not an awful lot I can say in the time I've got available because it's quite a large and active field. The key thing here, the message I want to get across, is it facilitates, if you like, anytime, anywhere access to information and resources and learning, if you like, and also sometimes somewhere. Now these, I think, are really two sides of the same coin, because anytime, anywhere is obviously, if you like, making use of the downtime we have. We're waiting for a bus, we're traveling on the underground, wherever, and we quickly fire up the mobile and just check to see if someone's answered a message or do some other online activity. Sometimes, somewhere, if you like, is when we have specific online tools and activities that are targeted to a specific context or time. For example, I've gone to pick up a train and I need access to information about the arrivals of the train, or an airplane, for example. Is it running late? So therefore, I might be inclined to fire up an app on my mobile. In fact, Google does this quite nicely, and it'll tell me whether the plane's arriving on time. So if you like that, those are two complementary kinds of activities or types of activities which we can use in relation to language learning. And also, when we actually talk about these mobile devices, I think anyone who's got one will realize that they have, if you like, a massive array of tools that are apps and functions which are available for learning and also for language MOOCs, and that's why we tend to use the term digital Swiss Army knife to reflect this. And also, it's important to mention, if there's actually anybody who's who's tried to run these courses, that unfortunately not all the MOOCs can be accessed from all the mobile devices. I'm not going to give a list, but some platforms are better than others, and even within a specific platform, not all functions are actually appropriate or available, if you like, for this function. So let's come down to affordances. This is in the good old Gibsonian sense of the word, of these mobile devices for language MOOCs. Our experience and analysis leads us to conclude that we really have three kinds of affordances here. Firstly, and obviously, they can serve as mobile course clients. So as I said previously, obviously not all of these activities, well, not all the courses are accessible, and even within some of the platforms, not all the activities are actually appropriate. Because, for example, I can remember being perhaps a bit of a sad computer scientist some years ago when I got my first mobile phone. I went to the trouble of downloading a book on the phone and actually read it on the small screen, which was a little difficult activity. So if you like, we've got activities within a language MOOC which require considerable amounts of text to be read, or text to be entered even, and are not necessarily adapted to the size of the screen and the keyboards we have, then this can put a bit of a cap on these sorts of activities. Obviously, it's a lot easier now. We've got better broadband, and even with some of the 3 and 4G access to data we've got, instead of actually typing, we can actually record it and upload the recordings to the platform. Also, the advantage here as portable course clients is actually these tools actually facilitate more frequent and better integrated access. If you like, this is very positive, because in a sense what we're doing is we're taking the education, the interaction, the learning from the formal educational context, that classroom, or if you like, when we're sat down at home or at work with a coffee, we're actually working with our computer in an LMS or VLE, to something we can do in our everyday life, which is really, really, really positive. Because even if we're not in a context where the second language is necessarily used automatically, it can still enable us to be thinking in that language. And if we've got activities related to the language we want to learn, then it can give us more exposure and more practice. Okay, the second point is that these devices are essentially also mobile sensor-enabled devices, which actually provide us with in which ways to interact with our local context. I mean, we can go a lot further than just getting geodata. We can take photographs, tag them, etc. And this really is a very constructive way to complement our online activities in these sorts of courses. So, for example, if we ask people to just take a photo of something positive or amusing they've seen in their everyday activity, and then describe it with a couple of sentences, and you can see that that's something which is made a lot easier with these phones, with these smart devices. Also, obviously, when we're when we're talking about these with these devices, we really have to appreciate that there are app-oriented handheld computers in a way, and we've got a whole vast array of apps which go from generic tools which enable us to do things through to specific more apps. Now, obviously, in a sense, we're opening the Pandora's box when we start to look at these sorts of issues, because we know there's fragmentation across the different platforms. Not all the apps are available on all the different devices. They don't necessarily work in the same way. So the key thing here is that when you actually develop these tools, then what one has to do is actually provide, if you like, descriptions of functionalities that are required from apps and not specific app names. Related key points here is the idea of BYOD, bring your own device, and data shows that this is actually intrinsically motivating for all of us, and specifically for the students, because if you like, we're already used to our device, we're used to the tools we got, so therefore it's not that much extra work actually using them and getting the information in. And therefore it's reasonable to assume that to some extent this facilitates self-directed learning. And where we are at the moment with this is actually beginning to design language MOOCs that can build upon this mobile devices and assisted language learning, and to see what we can actually learn from this and what affordances they actually give, and also how popular they are. So summarizing briefly now, what our experience shows is that careful language MOOC design is actually required. I mean, in a sense, it's not just a question of banging together a load of resources and letting them get on with it and by magic they learn. No, I mean, a lot of careful analysis has to be undertaken beforehand to plot the learning paths, which is actually essential for providing the relevant support mechanisms, and that hierarchical mobile-assisted language learning apps can actually be used to complement this process beyond their use of mobile platforms, to actually provide, if you like, the authentic, which is so important, the authentic anytime, anywhere, or sometime, somewhere activities which appear initially to reinforce the learning. So research questions that we got open at the moment, which is fueling our work, is what second language scenarios will connect these language MOOCs and mobile language learning apps, and within these scenarios, are certain activities more appropriate for mobile devices than others? And finally, MAL-MOOCs, as we call them, obviously these are not the end of any second language learning story, but merely a step towards a just-in-time second language learning, and even what we like to call digital second language living. I mean, tools like Google Glass combined with Google Translate give you a pretty good domination of a language, so it gets one to reflect upon how language learning will actually be undertaken in the future. Okay, thank you very much. And on the last slide, I've got some recent up-to-date publications that you can get hold of if you want to find more about this work. Thank you very much.